Should we start? I'm just going to start it. Okay. Welcome everyone. My name's Gabby Martinez. I work at the Illawarra Shoalhaven Local Health District. I'm here today in my capacity of the chair of the Illawarra Shoalhaven, the Wollongong Community Drug Action Team. Sorry, it was automatic, Illawarra. So I'm sitting here on beautiful Dharawal country, and I'd like to acknowledge the Wadi Wadi people who are the traditional custodians of the land here, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal people or Torres Strait Islanders people that are here with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge the disproportionate harm that alcohol has caused to many First Nation communities, and that this harm is a painful legacy of colonisation that still continues today. A little bit of housekeeping. This is going to be recorded, as you've all been made aware, and the people that are registered will get a copy of the recording. The format will basically be a panel discussion, and then there'll be times for Q&A. So if you can use the chat function to put your questions in, and Gail will monitor the chat. For any questions, you can put them in at any time, and then when the presenters are finished, we'll go through the questions. So the community drug action teams are basically groups of community members, local health districts, representatives from government and non-government agencies who work together on alcohol and other drug issues affecting the local community. So let's crack on to all our speakers. We've got three wonderful panellists joining us today. We're very lucky that they've given up their time to be with us today. So first, I'd like to introduce Tony Brown. So he's going to speak briefly first. Tony Brown is a passionate advocate, and he's also the chair of the Hunter Region Multicultural CDAT and a legal researcher. So over to you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Gabby. I'll just have to go to the settings to try and bring my presentation up. Okay, thanks once again. The panelists and myself in particular have no declarations of conflicts of interest. I'd also like to emphasise the fact that we are not representing the views of New South Wales Health or Odyssey House. They're our own views we are expressing. And that also a key point is that we support quite a number of the elements of the vibrancy laws, particularly those which further enhance the activation of our cities at night and towns in a safe and responsible manner. So my presentation consists quickly of some words, but also some images. And the first image in terms of is the reach of alcohol harms, covering a whole diverse range of society and medical issues. I'd like to pay my respects to traditional owners of the land, the Worimi and Awabakal people. So there's two main things I want to address firstly. The first is what are the New South Wales Vibrancy Laws? And I'll quickly explore that by taking a satellite view and highlighting those main features, the trends in the laws over the years and where we seem to be heading. Secondly, there are 10 points briefly I'd like to make in terms of what our concerns are about these sugar-coated laws. I'll be returning towards the end of our webinar to discuss where to from here, with a few suggestions we've put together to try and sustain our efforts to make New South Wales much more safer at night. So what are the New South Wales Vibrancy Laws? The first time they've tried to blend New South Wales planning laws with the alcohol laws to reduce duplication and cutting red tape in a transparent manner. And some of our speakers particularly be zooming in on that one. The second thing is they've changed significantly the structures and the agencies involved in the regulation of New South Wales gambling and drinking. So one of those was creating a nighttime commissioner and his team 24. So the changes to those two planning and related alcohol laws have really rejigged the relationship between those different government agencies. And from my previous experience in regulating the regulation of harms in Newcastle, that in 2008, the Newcastle Council produced an after dark strategy. And I think the history of these new laws can be traced back to that. And in particular, Newcastle Council wished to take over the licence regulation process in terms of that in Newcastle. So a key element of the new laws going forward is the fact that the role, the devolution of powers to local councils and government, and just how equipped are those in terms of training and experience to deal with these very complex laws. So there's a strong emphasis in the new laws on entertainment and fun at night by activating the entertainment and alcohol industry. A key feature and a very concerning feature is the extension of 2 hours in late night trading. And we know from previous evidence in Newcastle that one of the biggest predictors of alcohol-related violence and harms, which covers a very broad horizon, for example, drink driving down to domestic violence and non-domestic violence, is extending late trading hours. There's also, for the industry, an 80% reduction in licensing costs and large financial grants to the industry. For example, in Newcastle, 4 licensed premises put a bid in and were successful in obtaining $200,000. Now, unfortunately for them, when the person representing the hotels was interviewed by the local ABC station, they put the natural question to them, what are you going to do with the $200,000? And unfortunately, the industry representative had to think about that for a while and say, well, we're going to increase nighttime foot traffic and it'll make Newcastle, if you want a haircut at the night, then you can get a haircut at night. Importantly, also as a new feature, which historic roots go back to the Newcastle After Dark strategy, was creating special entertainment precincts, or SEPs. Jan from Byron Bay will be addressing that issue. What they do is create special geographic enclaves which mirror where, also coincidentally, where Boxar's violence hotspots exist, where alcohol outlets in those SEPs are afforded much greater scope through the council to increase, for example, trading hours and also to set noise limits. Another key feature of the vibrancy laws is a deliberate shift to taking limited rights away from residents and crossing those over in terms of favours for the alcohol and gambling lobby. So that's a very quick snapshot view of the legislation. It is very complex, but again, here I have the figure demonstrating the breadth of alcohol harms in terms of domestic violence, street violence, but also the important point, a very important point, of domestic and family violence and related harms. Now, our major concern in Newcastle communities was when the Newcastle Council discussed these new laws, the whole issue of safety for our emergency workers, these types of statistics about violence were not addressed by the local council. So our argument is key elements are being left out. The next 2 slides, I'll try and quickly summarise these in terms of what we consider is a short list of significant community concerns. First of all, the new liquor laws, the lopsided laws, discourage reliance on public health and criminal data. It's a major concern in terms of any assessments of the safety or lack of safety for licensed premises, for example, when there appears to be a significant shift away from reliance upon very robust health data and crime data, for example, from Boxar, but the international search that points out the harms associated with increasing trading hours. That is the inconvenient truth that will not be addressed by the government and the industry. There's a lack of impartiality. The reliance upon courts and other things have been devolved down to areas where the industry has much more say. And there's a terrible nexus between poker machine harms and late trading. So their answer to the violence is what we've described as a gimmick in terms of an international purple flag scheme, which is not a genuine method of reducing alcohol-related violence. And unfortunately, residents and families living in SEPs will be warned that they can expect more noise, more disturbances, and on their property documents will be stamped a similar warning for prospective buyers, warning them that they are moving into a geographic location which potentially has high levels of violence, noise and disturbances. So that's a quick overview and snapshot, and I hope to be speaking to you again about the final point in terms of where to from here. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to Gabra.
Thanks, Tony. So as Tony said, he'll come back after the other speakers and more about what we can do, what action we can do. If you've got any questions, just put them in the chat now so you don't forget them. We're going to go straight to our second speaker for the webinar today, and we're very happy to present Dr. John Crozier. He's a trauma surgeon from the Royal Australian College of Surgeons. So he's going to talk about the medical impact of this new legislation. So over to you, John.
Abby, thank you very much. And I want to say from the outset what a privilege it is to speak with the group today and commend 40 people who have allocated an hour of time to this really important topic. I do want to very singularly commend Tony Brown for his exceptional leadership, tenacity, endurance and courage in the journey. A lot of learning for many of us in consequence of Tony's commitment. I do also want to praise Andrew Reid, who's one of the participants on the event, for, again, the leadership that he displays. I'll just share my screen now. Now, is that displaying?
No.
There we go.
So it's a talk on both alcohol and gambling in association with injury. I've got to say these comments are personal, okay, and don't carry the imprimatur of the College of Surgeons necessarily, nor the Department of Health. I'll talk about a day in the office, mention a range of measures that have been proven to work, and close highlighting harm reduction measures. These are patients managed in a single day in a major trauma centre. They're representative of what occurs each day in our 9 major trauma centres in New South Wales. Early in the day, 18-year-old male, multiple stab wounds to chest and abdo, tachycardic, estimated time 20 minutes. A bit later, 19-year-old woman has fallen downstairs. Initially, she was unconscious. She's now become combative, and there is the smell of alcohol on her breath. These are very difficult patients to manage. From the transport phase, they represent threat to the ambulance staff, and within the arrival in emergency departments, and many would be aware how overcrowded our EDs are currently, the management of a patient like this is a real handsful. Next patient, male, alleged assault, stomped and kicked by multiple people, facial injuries, ETA 15 minutes. Later, 20-year-old male, alleged assault, baseball bat, laceration to the head, again, the heavy smell of alcohol on the breath of this young male. These are what are called trauma calls. A team will get an alert. We see representatives here of large numbers of the surgeons, the anaesthetists, emergency physicians, a range of nursing staff, radiographers, all called to the bedside pending the arrival of one of those patients that I've just described. Frequently, these staff are pulled from the routines of the day, so it might be they come down from an emergency operating list to be present for the receipt of the trauma victim. Same day, another male, 40, allegedly assaulted. We see at the base of the skull here, the second vertebra has had this peg broken off. That potentially impinges on a critical part of the spinal stem, threatening life, 10 minutes before arrival. Later, mates had brought a 40-year-old who'd spent the night in slumber smelling of alcohol, but the following morning, difficulty rousing the male had been the basis of concern, and the transport to the hospital, fortunately, allowing a CT, skull fracture here, and we see this crescent of light grey, which is actually blood internal to the skull, displacing the brain, squeezing it. Life-threatening condition, time critical for surgical intervention. That's but one day in a major trauma centre currently. These are figures from New South Wales Health. We have, due alcohol, 137 hospitalised each day, at least 38 presenting from alcohol-related presentation to ED. Now that's in contrast with methamphetamine causing hospitalisation or ED presentation. A very different perception, I think, in the minds of most people of what illicit drugs represent in terms of threat to the health system. But alcohol is actually the main cause of most of the drug-related presentations to the health system. For each month of the incoming government's term, there were 150 deaths from alcohol. In contrast, 3 tragically from methamphetamine. Now, we do know that there are a range of reasonable measures that work. They were introduced from 2008 in Newcastle. They were replicated from 2014 in an entertainment precinct centring on the King's Cross area, and were in place for at least 2 years with good effect. 3 a.m. cessation of alcohol service, 1:30 a.m. one-way door, freeze on the issuance of new liquor licence, and the only whole-of-state measure, and this was slipped in quietly by Premier O'Farrell, again without the notice of many, a restriction on takeaway sales, bulk sales from 10 p.m, whole of New South Wales. The focus on the very pejorative term lockout and disproportionate narrative about financial harm that's been perpetrated is a narrative that we have to be prepared to counter. It's these observations I think we need to be aware of. Here, estimated assault trend for the Sydney CBD, we see a downward projection, a trend generally downward in that area across 2009 to 2014 with the introduction of the measures. We'll see a yearly variation with the warmer months, more people likely to be consuming and more interpersonal violence, downtrend through winter. And this annual diurnal variation is constant. A very rapid downtick with the introduction of the measures in the entertainment precinct, and that has been a sustained consequence of those measures. If we look within the King's Cross precinct itself, again, a dramatic reduction of interpersonal assaults, alcohol related. Now, interestingly, the only whole-of-state measure was the restriction on takeaway liquor sales, bulk packaged outlets, and a dramatic reduction of interpersonal assault associated with alcohol consumption. This was particularly the case in Western New South Wales, northwestern New South Wales. Often small communities, single policeman, frequently a single nurse. And those are dramatic reductions from a very reasonable restriction on the sale of bulk alcohol from takeaway outlets. I was particularly attracted by a measure that I'd seen work as a range and way of tracking alcohol policy. The use of facial-maxillary fractures, really horrific facial fractures, are very associated with alcohol on either the part of the patient or the perpetrator. So I'd asked the St Vincent's group to look out their data on facial-maxillary injuries for the 2 years prior to the introduction of these measures. These are the sort of injuries I'm talking about. Horrific, they can be lifetime disfigurement, they require often complex facial-maxillary surgery. In the 2 years prior, and this is easily gleanable data retrospectively, There are 145 of these types of horrific injuries managed in St Vincent's Hospital. Now, following the introduction, for the 2 years thereafter, there was a dramatic reduction in that pattern of presentation. I checked with the other hospitals that might be expected to receive any displacement of those injuries. No uptick in the injuries managed in Prince Alfred or Prince of Wales Hospital. So this is a dramatic policy-related reduction in that pattern of injury. I can confirm also there were no patients admitted to the intensive care unit with alcohol-associated injury that required ventilation for the period of the introduction of those measures. Now, just quickly, closer to home, this is Liverpool Hospital in southwest Sydney, major trauma centre, an area to the west known as Miller. From Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research data, these temperature maps highlight incidents of non-domestic assault, frequently alcohol associated. There are a number of 24-hour liquor outlets in this region, and interestingly, an epicentre of violence, domestic violence, and interpersonal assault in the Miller region. This is the LGA of Miller, and within that area centrally is the Green Valley Hotel. Adjacent it is an Aboriginal Budjari Community Health Centre. We do have an incorporated TAB within the complex. Just using again a concept I think familiar to many in this audience, social economic indices for areas. We have the concept of disadvantaged, where we can plot unemployed, low income, overcrowded or one parent families on the basis of census data. Look at advantage, the contrast with diplomas, tertiary education, professional employment, high income. The Miller area, this LGA, is in the lowest quintile of advantage. But further to that, and this is the triangle that I drew before, this is where the hotel is. This group are in the lowest percentile. There are 99% of the population more economically advantaged than the local residents of this hotel. How is it that then we reconcile these earnings on gambling machines in that premise? From data that was then available on the Liquor and Gaming website, for the Liverpool LGA, 28 EGMs per liquor licence premise, on average and per annum earning 203,000. And if we focus then on this one hotel in arguably one of the most disadvantaged socioeconomic areas in New South Wales, on 30 electronic gambling machines, it's 38th most profitable in New South Wales in terms of its income generated on electronic gambling machines. Now, the industry advertised on PubTick how to do it, how to get your mini casino running to maximal effect. And these are the how-tos. You do create a pattern that lets patrons easily walk through the room, allowing them to peruse machines and options. You don't create too many dead ends. You do provide a cashier, gaming bar, and automatic teller machine. You let the customer choose the interaction with the employee or not. You position the gaming views such that it can be viewed outside, and you don't make internal access available. You disconnect from time. You render patients soporific. Now, or persons soporific. We've had highlighted, even as recently as today, the massive spend in this state on pokies. 3.5 billion per annum. We've highlighted with a range of inquiries, the Bergen, the Bell and the New South Wales Crime Commission, the problem that is the case in New South Wales, disproportionate harm from the gambling machines, particularly embedded in licensed premises. We've had, and Tony, I praised, regulatory capture with a subsumption of the Department of Enterprise and Trade of ILGA. This is conveniently called light touch regulation. Damning inquiries, Crown prevented from ongoing operations, Star found guilty of tremendous fraud and corruption. New South Wales Crime Commission, again, consistent findings about the problems, criminal problems associated with the proceeds through the machines. I commend the bravery of people like Troy Stolz, a whistleblower, highlighting the damages that the current utilisation of these machines represent. I'm keen to know what the legal definition of vibrancy actually is. This is not what should be the case in so many of our hospitals as an accepted part of alcohol and gambling trade. And I'll close. We in the state are fortunate. We've had leaders courageously document the evidence of reasonable measures that reduce a lot of this preventable harm. I'll highlight the tragic death of Kip Kipri, a colleague I was privileged to know and learn greatly from, who has highlighted a range of the durable measures to reduce harm, not at the expense of business, preserving amenity, and for the good of the broader good of the community and the prevention of the public health consequence of alcohol and gambling related harm. And as I say, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been asked to present.
Well, thank you so much, Sean. That was really confronting. It really paints a different picture of all the glamour that's advertised in the alcohol, what the confronting reality actually is. It's so similar to tobacco when we were still allowed to be advertised and it was so glamorised, and then our hospital were filled with trauma from and the damage that the tobacco industry caused. Now we're seeing it, with alcohol. It's so normalised in our society. So thank you very much for that presentation. Now we're going to go straight to Jan, and then please put your questions and comments in the chat. I've noticed some of you are doing it. Thank you. And then we'll go for questions. So I'd like to introduce Jan Banham. She's a former Byron Shire Council Mayor, and she was also a New South Wales parliamentarian for a long time. So we're very fortunate to have someone with that insight of how legislation is made in New South Wales and implemented. So over to you, Jan. Now, I'm just going to give everyone a warning. Jan's located in a regional area, and sometimes the internet can cut out because, unfortunately, even though alcohol's available at all times, internet isn't so great. So over to you, Jan. Thank you.
Gabby, just before we start, Jan, if you could just guide me with which document you need up first. I've got them ready to share my screen for you. Are you there, Jan? Still saying that she's... There you are, Jan. Try that now. You can unmute, Jan.
Is anyone still sharing their screen?
No. She's got access now, though, Gabby. This was the one when we're dealing with Apple and Teams that it doesn't always like to communicate effectively. So, Jan, you should be able to communicate with us. I've disabled your mic. Everything's ready for you. Interesting.
Gail, are you sharing the screen, your screen?
I haven't started yet, but I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. And apologies, everyone. I am not a tech expert and find this all a bit frustrating. And I'm just so honoured to be on this panel and so encouraged to see the interest. First of all, though, I'd like to acknowledge that, as Gabby mentioned, I'm from the North Coast. I'm on Bundjalung country, and I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And to Tony and Dr. Crozier, thank you so much for all your contributions to safety and harm reduction in relation to alcohol and gambling. And thank you to everyone tuning in. So important that there's public interest in this SEP process. And special thanks to all CDAT members for the vital work that you do in keeping the community safe. And just so you know, I was once a part of establishing a CDAT in my local area. And home for me is a small town on the New South Wales North Coast with approximately 10,000 residents, but 2 million visitors a year, and over 100 licensed venues in an area that's now proposed as a special entertainment precinct. My community was taken by surprise as our alcohol decided to apply for a Kickstart grant without initiating the consultation processes prescribed in the SEP guidelines and the Kickstart process. So for the last 6 months, we've had a community group looking at the proposal, trying to organise and understand what is a very complicated and convoluted legislative program. And that's a real problem. I've been doing local government and state issues for over 30 years, and I've got to say, this is very complicated. And so what I've done, and if Gail's able to show, is to just I've put together all the aspects of this process on one page, and you can see how complicated it is. And unfortunately, or deliberately, the government has not provided a one-stop shop for understanding where to go to find all the bits of information.
And
for my community...
Sorry, Jan, just to interrupt you. Which document would you like displayed right now? Your BOSCAR, the information, or
the
SEP?
information one first, and that just gives people an indication about the complexity that we're confronted with as communities trying to understand what's going on with this very convoluted process. And I put it all together on one page, so all those links to the components were all together, because I've been dealing with people for 6 months who are confused, and rightly so, because the government has not provided a one-stop shop for all the information that communities need to have access to. And unfortunately, our council hasn't provided that either. So I've put it together to assist me and others who are trying to look at this and understand the consequences. One of the other things that was vital for us, because we have a history of dealing with the potential for extended trading hours, and this is where I really want to acknowledge Tony and the work we did back in 2008 with the Last Drinks campaign. And then Tony was very much involved with the Byron Bay community in 2013 and 14 with the lockout laws, and totally concur with John that, you know, these are proven positives for harm reduction. And this is a real concern, because we're going into a position where we're taking on risk, and without the government being open and transparent about the risks. And for that, one of the first things I did for the Byron community was look at Boxar, which I've included the link on that information sheet. And when you look at the Boxar details, what you find out about your own community can be quite shocking. And this is what we saw for our community. I looked at the figures for the 2481 suburb and then looked at the town centre. The suburb figures were frightening enough. They're showing that Byron suburb is over four times the average on assaults and sexual assaults. But then when you look at the town centre, where most of the activity happens and where the SEP is proposed, it's 8 times the state average, which is frightening. And we all know that many incidents are never recorded, and particularly in a town that's experiences high tourist numbers, a lot of visitors who experience assault never go to the police. They're traumatized, and they go to social support services but won't go to the police. So what we're looking at is a very modest number, but these are the figures on Boxar, and I encourage everyone to make sure you've got those figures, because unfortunately in our situation, our council doesn't report those figures. We used to back in 2008 and 2014, but no longer. And when people see these figures, they are shocked, and they should be, because there's an underbelly, particularly in tourist towns, but anywhere with a high number of licensed venues. These are the outcomes, and we know that to be true. So in looking at the process, that those council areas that are considering taking on this so-called vibrancy reform, the government provides guidelines, what they call mandatory guidelines. But in our circumstance, they haven't been followed, but they still got the grant to proceed with doing it. Each step defines mandatory steps, and I've put each step, there's 13 steps in the process. I've put each step in there, and some comments, which are the comments relating to what everyone needs to look out for, to know that your council has done the work that describes the risks and opportunities, if there's any, to seek government funding, to take steps to plan for potential risk, and to ensure that the community is engaged and informed in this process, because if it goes down the path of leading to a trial or a permanent situation, there's no coming back. And I think that's what's frightening about this. You change the character of a town, of a community, and if you happen to be a visitor area, you change the branding and who you're attracting. And we've seen it before. We saw it in 2008. We saw it in 2014. Those situations where you attract a certain type of visitor, and in our community, very much at odds with what our community values, which is a nature experience, a well-being and healthy experience. Alcohol does not encourage those aspects, and every community needs to be really empowered and informed and engaged. So I missed Tony's presentation. I'm aware that he was in one of his slides alluding to how communities could come together and be informed and ensure that the processes are right. So I think that's what we're committed to, trying to help other communities to make sure that this journey, if your council decides to go down it, that you're informed and engaged and can work together to try and make sure that you don't end up taking a step that's a step too far with so-called vibrancy. But I think most of us see it as a step into the unknown with great risk and not many opportunities to achieve what most of us think is vibrancy.
Thanks.
So
Thanks, Jan.
I'll leave it there and hope that everyone's encouraged to take action.
Thank you, Jan.
So, Tony, do you want to speak a bit? Just before you speak, I just want to say to everyone, look, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed by this, because it is, I think it's designed to make us all feel overwhelmed. So we're going to send you some information after this. We're going to send you a recording and send you that Jan's handout that she's put together, because it is so overwhelming. And I just say that in Wollongong, for example, at the Unibar, they've just been given, I think, 170,000, or there's been all these grants announced as a good news story for like state government grants to different bars and venues for live music. So it'd be interesting for you all to keep track of those in your LGA. Anyway, over to you, Tony.
Thanks, Gabby, and thanks to the two brilliant presentations from John. And Jan, look, this last little bit of time, I'm cognizant of the time, is that we can all get excited about this and emphasising the issue about evidence-based approaches and collaboration. But I really encourage we go now one step further and say, what can we do about it and how can we get there? So I've just put together now 5 simple points in terms of progressing the community need to resolve these big issues with these new alcohol and gambling laws clearly centred on boosting the commercial benefits for the industry whilst detracting from the community. So we need, in the first instance, I would encourage the regional centres of the city, of the state and the city, to form a coalition. And down at the bottom, we've come up with a name. It's only, very early days, but the Community Alcohol Action Coalition. And the type of groups you would include in that point 1, in terms of, for example, PNCs, Aboriginal health, etc. And you're the best people in those local regions to know your groups and encourage them to form a coalition and work together. The second key point, as we saw from Jan in her excellent slide, was researching your community's exposure to the harms. And the best information for that is through Boxer, health data and other academic research. And unfortunately, it would appear that to the government and the industry that the evidence, the independent scientific evidence, really is like turning the sun on to Dracula. They really don't like it, and it's an inconvenient truth for them to deal with the research evidence, not the industry hysteria. And I would encourage that you check with your local council, because some of this seems to have done in a very non-transparent way. They're approached by the state government, incentivised by very large financial grants to form these SEPs. But attached to that, well, not necessarily attached, but associated with the vibrancy reforms, was a 2-hour increase in late trading. And we know there's very little other measures that can cause such demonstrable researched harm. And insist upon your community's inclusion in these very important issues, and we'll send you more information about forming the coalition and us providing assistance to those communities. So that's the community mobilisation point. I'd like somehow, and I'm not quite sure if it's possible, to do a poll or to emphasise how many of you attendees would in principle support we form a coalition to address primarily the application and the interpretation of these new vibrancy laws. I can't see you as well as seeing my notes, but maybe possible for you, Gab, if you could turn people's cameras on and there was a thumbs up or some indicator that if you support in principle the formulation of a community alcohol action group.
Tony, I don't think that we've got the poll, but we have got people that are putting their thumbs up with a response to the question that you've just asked.
Right.
Even if we could also put the question into the chat and we would be able to capture a real review with thumbs up and reactions in the comment as well. So if you'd like to just ask that question and I'll type it.
Ask the question. Do you want to summarise the question, Gab?
Number of participants that would respond. That's what you were asking. Is that correct?
Would in principle support the creation of a community alcohol action committee.
The creation of, just say the committee again, the group?
The
Coalition.
Community Alcohol Action Committee. All right. So we've now got time, I think, Gab, for questions and answers. And I know of one person very interested in this, Deb Rowe from Newcastle. Deb was the retired senior sergeant responsible at the Newcastle Command. In Newcastle, by a quick way of background, prior to 2008, we had the highest rate of alcohol violence in New South Wales, and we had the highest rate of violence on police officers. So she's vastly experienced and articulate to describe what were the conditions in Newcastle and the relevance of what happened in Newcastle. This is what will likely happen in New South Wales if we allow the further liberalisation of very modest evidence-based alcohol harm control. So can we switch Deb on, who's currently muted? And you might like the camera, that's up to you. But Gab, would you mind asking if Deb can speak?
Doing that for you now. So Deb, you should be able to now engage with your microphone and your camera.
Hi, Tony. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Go ahead, Deb. You've got the microphone,
Oh,
and we
okay.
have got a couple of. We also have a couple of questions that we'll link back to after you've spoken,
Sure.
Deb.
Sure. So yeah, thanks, Tony. I was in the police for 36 years on the front line in Newcastle and saw firsthand the aftermath of all the alcohol carnage before the Newcastle solution came in. So I was a sergeant in 2000, and for between 2000 and 2008, before the Newcastle solution was introduced, a Friday and Saturday night, I just can't even, it's similar to what John was talking about in the hospitals. We respond to a couple of hundred calls for help in and around the Newcastle CBD, around the alcohol areas. And a briefing on a Friday and Saturday night was 6 o'clock, talking to 6 or 7 crews and just informing them of, just to try and keep safe. It was like sending the troops out of the trenches. It really was. It was unlikely they were going to come back unscathed from a 12-hour shift. It was just constant, hardly any meals, getting assaulted regularly. And I actually know of police officers that are just leaving the cops in droves in this area because of the problems now that have happened since the solution has been quashed. And we're going back to the bad old days. And I actually felt sick when I read that they're going to increase the alcohol trading hours for 2 hours again. And it's just going to go back to the way it used to be. And it's just a really, really scary predicament that we're in. So I would implore anybody that's listening to this webinar to get involved in this coalition to help in trying to push back on this onto this committee, to try and push back on this SEP, because it is it's dangerous grounds.
Well, thanks, Deb, for your insight and all those decades of experience about the impact of this new alcohol legislation. We've got someone called DJ with a camera off with their hand up. Diana James, did you want to make a comment or a question?
Sorry, just before we jump into that, Tony, do you want to continue to share that slide, or have you finished sharing and we can open up the screens again? Thank you. Go ahead, Diana. You need to unmute yourself. Take a moment.
I'd encourage everybody during this Q&A, it makes it a bit more homely and friendly, if you'd like, to turn on your cameras as well as just the microphone.
Not everybody has the camera option, Tony. We're just opening up the cameras and microphones as people are putting up their hands.
Great, thanks.
You can do it for everyone as an organiser of the webinar. I can't do it, but I think the Odyssey House team, you can just open them all up for everyone.
Just give me a moment. That is not in
Thanks.
my skill set. I've never done it, so just bear with me. Diana, the floor is yours.
Yes, no, I didn't have a question. I was just agreeing to the suggestion.
Okay, thank you for that. We've also got student Ellen Plunkett.
Ellen's on mute still. Unmute yourself, Ellen.
She'll need to unmute. Just take a while for that to kick in. You still there, Ellen?
We don't have. Has everyone got access now to cameras?
It won't allow me to do everyone, but I am unmuting everybody.
Can you put your questions in the chat in the meantime?
Yep. You're right to monitor the chat side of it.
Okay, while people type, I'll just like to say that we will send out all the information, all the handouts that Jan put together and the recording of this, and also Tony will be speaking at all the CDAT regional meetings. Gail's going to organise for Tony to come out and speak to each CDAT regional meeting more in detail about it, so that'll be great. So then the CDATs can become more organised and more familiar with the impact of the legislation. So if anyone's here that's not in CDAT, it's probably worth joining as well, joining your local CDAT. And if you don't know where your local CDAT is, just contact myself or Gail, and we can give the details of your local CDAT. But we will start an online meeting, probably a few weeks away. We'll set a date for all those people interested in doing like a community action coalition and raising awareness about the impact of the legislation and what we can actually do about it.
Gabby, for people that aren't members of the CDAT, sorry, I'll turn my camera on as well. For those that aren't members of the CDAT that would like to become a member, our CDAT website, so CDAT New South Wales website, will enable them to register their interest, and we'll be able to put them in touch with the relevant CDAT in the area that they're in. So please, by all means, so that we don't lose you and emails don't get lost, that's probably the best way for them to register their interest in becoming a member of the CDAT.
Would people have any questions of clarifying about the new laws, the vibrancy laws? So I'm happy if you've got any questions about the vibrancy laws to please put them to me now, or any other questions in terms of the impact of them, what's likely to happen. Please feel free to unmute yourself and
Have they got
ask the
access
question.
to camera? Because Jan's just said question to John, but I can't see if people have access to cameras or not. Doesn't look like they have.
Most of them have.
No, we don't have access to cameras, but the microphone's been turned on. I actually lived up at the Cross when those vibrancy laws came in, and I firsthand saw the impact of the decline in the violence that was happening up there when they restricted the alcohol use in the area. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing.
John.
I was just happy to put a quick response into Jan, who in the chat had asked, do we know how many road accidents are associated with alcohol? Just gently, a preferable word to use is crashes. Most of these impacts between vehicles or with pedestrians are not accidents. They're not acts of God or rare random events. There's a matrix of causality, and frequently alcohol is a contributor. So still in this state, and we've had the worst record in terms of death on our roads for the last 15 years, there are over 60 people more than would have lost their life this time in New South Wales last year due to road crash injury. The number of hospitalisations exceeds 15,000 per annum in this state, and about a fifth of those probably have alcohol contributing to the crash causation. I've got to also highlight that there's been a drop-off, a dramatic drop-off in the roadside testing for breath, alcohol in the breath of the drivers. The police, there's almost been a direction to go easy on this enforcement. And again, that's quite a concern. So hand in glove with initiatives that have a common word, vibrancy, we are seeing directives de facto to back off on some of the science-proven ways of reducing crashes that are alcohol related. So the short of it, at least a fifth of the fatalities involve alcohol. A significant amount of the hospitalisation burden has alcohol as a concomitant factor in the hospitalisation.
We do have a question in there as well for you, John, from Jan. You've just answered the association of the alcohol in the area of, sorry, no, you have answered that. I thought that there was another question. She's also mentioned in there, in her area, there's also been a focus on cannabis testing.
Yeah, I wish that we would drop the word medicinal as an adjective associated with the noun cannabis or marijuana. This is learning from the tobacco, from the alcohol, and from the gambling and gun industries to slip a clever word in front of the key objective that you want to maximize the sale of. So if we put medicinal in front of marijuana, we have reasonable agencies, colleges of medicine, colleges of road safety, incorporating in their policy documents measures around medicinal cannabis or medicinal marijuana. We make it extraordinarily hard for enforcement, and it's a weasel word. We don't talk about medicinal benzodiazepines or medicinal opiates, but we're being cleverly, connivingly encouraged to use this descriptor. Every state in the United States that's legalized marijuana has seen a significant uptick in road crash trauma. And now there's a backlash and a desire to wind back some of the damage. Colorado was the first jurisdiction in the United States, and there's been a wholesale carnage on the roads, marijuana related. The two often go hand in glove. Alcohol and cannabis often go hand in glove. And the tests for cannabis testing are actually very expensive, much more so than alcohol. The difficulty is that if a THC compound has been used, it's within the system for quite a long time after. It's metabolized more slowly than is the case with ethanol. But both of those are psychoactive. They are drugs that are not benign. And the short of it, we are just not we're not testing enough for either alcohol, and the marijuana is actually very, very problematic.
Thank you, John. Well, it's 1:30 now, so I think that we've come to our end of our webinar. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our speakers, so Tony Brown, Jan Barnum and Dr. John Crozier, for all their expertise and enthusiasm and their time that they've contributed today. It's been really wonderful and to hear all that your information and contributions. And I think the way forward now is to stay in touch and organise around this. And Gail is as part of her role in Odyssey House, can make sure that information gets out through all the community drug action teams, and that we're organised around the state for this. And I saw that Megan, one of the road safety officers in council, so it's also a good idea to reach out to your council and talk to the person who does safety and have a chat to them, or at least in the meantime find out who it is. Okay, thank you everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.